And this is going to be another Game of Thrones Q&A video. I apologize, this was supposed to be out a few weeks ago, and this is supposed to be a weekly thing, and it will continue to be, hopefully, but I've been busy with a lot of stuff, as well as some stuff with YouTube that I'm really excited about. But anyway, keep those questions coming for Star Wars, Game of Thrones, etc., and I'll try to get back to a more weekly thing with this. For this Q&A, I have a few questions from you guys, and I also want to quickly talk about what George R. R. Martin said in his Not a Blog a couple days ago about The Winds of Winter not being published on time for Game of Thrones Season 6. So let's jump right in, and our first question comes from Jacquelina. I hope that's right. And they write, maybe for your next Q&A, do you think Quaithe could be the Harpy and plan the attacks in order to prove to Dany that she does not belong in Meereen? So personally, I don't think that Quaithe is the Harpy or related to the Harpies. I think Quaithe is a ally of Dany's, and I don't think she would put her in that kind of danger with the Harpies trying to actually kill her just to tell her to kind of get the hell out of Meereen. But at this point, I'm starting to think that the Harpy is probably Daario himself, or possibly the Green Grace, as well as a few other characters that it still could be, since apparently Hizdahr is dead. We're not really sure about that. I think Hizdahr probably has some connection to the Harpies, but now that he actually got killed, I mean, as far as the show goes, and that's the other thing as far as the Green Grace. The Green Grace is not even in the show, but in the books it's heavily implied, and things seem to happen whenever she meets with Dany in the books. So from that standpoint, the question becomes, are they going to completely change who somebody is in the books as compared to the show? I mean, in the books, you kind of lean towards the Green Grace because, Dany tries to hide the murders of her Unsullied, and somehow the Green Grace finds out about him when she shows up to court the next morning. Also in the books, Hizdahr actually gets the killing stopped for 90 days somehow, suggesting that he is related to the Sons of the Harpy, but it was actually the Green Grace who suggested Dany marry Hizdahr. Also in the books, Dany takes hostages from all the noble families in order to try to stop the killings and the attacks, but once the Green Grace visits her in court again, and she kind of admits to her, we didn't really want to actually kill any of these people, the murders start again. She's finding out this information and passing to somebody or making the call herself. So it seems to be that in the books it's really heavily implied that it's her, but then again she's not on the show at all, and would they take such a major plot point and leave it out completely? Or in the show, will they even kind of show us who the Harpy is in the first place? Or is it just something where Dany will finally just be like, okay, fuck it, I'm going to Westeros, fuck all these people, I'm not dealing with these damn Harpies anymore? Or you can kind of look at it like a setup for the fighting pits when they made this big attack and tried to kill her, that set up Drogon coming in and her actually riding him for the first time. But not to get too deep here in all the suspects, that'd be a completely different video in the first place, but I think that for sure it's not Quaithe. I don't think Quaithe would risk her. If Quaithe is somebody like a Shara Dane or perhaps Shiera Seastar, Bloodraven's bastard sister, I think she's actually trying to look out for Dany. I don't think she would put Dany's life in danger just to say, go to Westeros, remember who you are, that type of stuff. And for our next question, Jake writes, Smokescreen, regarding A Song of Ice and Fire, what are your thoughts on the wall? Specifically, I'm wondering what you think about the existing theory that states the wall wasn't built to keep the others out of the Seven Kingdoms, but to keep humans out of the territory beyond the wall. So yeah, I actually like this theory, and I think it makes a lot of sense because, we see things from, the human perspective. We never see a point of view or a perspective from the others or the White Walkers. And I'm not saying I disagree with this necessarily, but I'm also starting to think that the wall actually just is what it is, because there are enchantments, it seems, that doesn't let them pass through the wall. Otherwise, you would think it'd be the other way around, where humans had some kind of enchantment where they couldn't pass through to the north. So now, do I think that Bran the Builder from back in the day, 8,000 years ago, built the wall when you have a race of ice beings that can manipulate ice? I don't necessarily believe that either, but it's hard to say. There are enchantments that don't let the Whites and White Walkers through certain areas. For example, Bloodraven's cave. Bran and all those guys get in there, and then the Whites chase after them, and they are destroyed when they pass through the opening of the cave. So I don't necessarily believe this is the case to keep, humans out from the north, because they're already there in the first place, and some were just already born there 8,000 years ago, I assume. But I'm not saying that it's not the case either. So I know that's not a, clear-cut answer. There is obviously some magic associated with the wall. Again, they can't pass. Although we did see two Whites reanimate, of course, the ones that tried to kill Lord Commander Mormont when Jon burned his hand, and they were beyond the wall at Castle Black on the other side. So Whites may not have an effect there, we don't know, but the White Walkers, obviously the wall has magical properties. Even Melisandre says her magic is stronger than theirs. I'm not really sure about this yet, but I do think either way we're going to see the wall come tumbling down. And for our next question, Janai writes, I have heard a strange theory that Ser Jorah is Azor Ahai. Would love to hear the pros and cons for that theory and hear your thoughts on how that could play into the storyline or endgame. Personally, I don't agree with this theory, but it was interesting to think about. So yeah, I've actually heard this theory, read about this theory. I think I actually mentioned it in a video before, really briefly, not anything in depth. So for any of you guys who hadn't heard about this theory, basically it states that Jorah Mormont is the Azor Ahai figure of the prophecy, if prophecy is even a real thing in this story, because he is with Dany the entire time. So we think that Dany, fits all these prophetic things literally, as far as reborn under a bleeding star, born amid salt and smoke, as far as the funeral pyre, hatching dragon eggs, waking dragons from stone. She fits everything literally. So the theory basically states that Jorah is actually Azor Ahai because he's with Dany during all these events. He has the blood of the dragon because he has Dany in his presence. He was reborn that night because he saw the dragons born, and that kind of changed his life and made him truly believe and join Dany for real. He was there amidst salt and smoke, reborn at that moment because he was crying and the smoke of the funeral pyre, etc., etc. So basically this theory makes him fit all the things of the prophecy and will be right out of left field as far as who the Azor Ahai character is. A relatively minor character. It's not one of our major characters like Dany or Jon Snow, and it would be a complete surprise. And I actually dig the idea of that, but I don't think it's actually true. The reason I don't think he's probably Azor Ahai is because I don't think there is going to be an Azor Ahai figure as in a literal magical person. I think Azor Ahai and prophecy in this story is probably more or less an ideal. And I've been talking about this more and more when this comes up as far as the prophecy, is that I think George R.R. Martin is writing this stuff in here because prophecy is kind of a weird thing. Do you hear about a prophecy like Rhaegar did and try to fulfill it? Or do you do something and then actually realize that you fulfilled a prophecy? They openly talk about the Azor Ahai or Prince that was promised prophecy in the books. So it makes you start to think that there's not actually going to be a literal magical figure, that it's only going to be a label slapped on somebody. For example, Mel thought that Stannis was Azor Ahai reborn, but only due to her religion because of misinterpretation of shit in her flames. So I think personally right now, Jon Snow is actually fulfilling the prophecy as far as battling the others. He's the only one out there that tried to unite everybody from north of the wall and south of the wall to come against the White Walkers and save the world, so to speak. But he's doing it not because he's trying to fulfill some prophecy. He's doing it because he believes it's the right thing to do. So if anybody gets that label, I think it will be somebody like Jon Snow or Dany when she gets across the Narrow Sea, whenever the hell she's coming home. But at the same time, you're already having people, other red priests, label Dany as Azor Ahai because of the dragons, obviously. I think you're going to have a few people labeled Azor Ahai. Possibly three heads of the dragon. Maybe that's the prophecy itself. 3 people come together to defeat the White Walkers or whatever the hell it is, if in fact prophecy is a real thing in our story. I hope that makes sense. And finally, Cold Pizza writes, great videos, man. One for the Q&A. Who do you think the Knight of the Laughing Tree is? Most people say it's Lyanna. I think it's Howland Reed. So yeah, this could be a complicated one. There are a few theories out there, but I tend to think that it actually is Lyanna Stark. But again, like most of these theories, until we get more books and more information and more pages to read, I'm still not completely sold on anything 100%. Mira told this story in the books to Bran, and Bran had never heard the story, and Mira was kind of surprised, like, your father never told you this story about the Knight of the Laughing Tree? I don't think it's Howland Reed because it would just be odd storytelling to me that he gets, supposedly beat up by a bunch of squires of these knights going to the tourney of Harrenhal, and then all of a sudden he gets revenge later as a knight that knows how to use a lance, as opposed to just whipping their asses right there on the spot. So some of the things that Mira says about the Knight of the Laughing Tree when telling this story to Bran on the way to see Bloodraven is that, they were shorter than average for a knight, I suppose. You have to take into account the sigil, which was a old werewood laughing, hence the name Knight of the Laughing Tree. After defeating the 3 knights, there was this booming voice which suggests it's not the real voice of the knight, and he was competent enough to joust 3 knights that were not really top of the line, so to speak, as far as jousting and winning tournaments, but trained jousters nevertheless. That points to me that it's not Howland Reed, although he's legendary in his fighting skills and badassery, but not being a trained, lancer, so to speak, as Mira tells Bran. The Cranningmen are not really that type of fighter. So to me, it points to it actually being Lyanna, and that's because, first of all, she's surprised that Bran doesn't know the story, which suggests again that it would be a Stark story or a Stark family member, and that Ned would have told Bran that story at some point about Lyanna, assuming that later on when they got back home, Lyanna said, that was me that fucking whipped those knights' asses. But the other evidence for me is just some simple things like, Lyanna was known for being a quote-unquote tomboy, very similar to Arya, because I believe Ned is speaking to Arya in one of their chapters. He tells her about Lyanna and how she reminds him of her because she's a tomboy and she likes to swordplay, ride horses, and it's noted how great of a rider Lyanna was. So it wouldn't be surprising that she would learn some jousting skills, riding skills, fighting skills, just like Arya does. And it's also noted that she was able to best binging when they were kids, when they were sword playing. So it's well known that Lyanna was pretty badass herself, and obviously that would fit Lyanna in a sense where she was probably shorter, just because, you know, biology. And the other thing that points to someone other than Howland Reed himself is the mismatched armor, and that points to the fact that this person didn't have access to armor regularly. It was something thrown together at the last minute. Also, you got to look at the sigil itself. It was a laughing tree, and that seems to be pointing to the old gods, which we know is the gods of House Stark and Lyanna herself, as well as Howland Reed too. So that would actually support both. So anyway, that's my thoughts in a nutshell, but I'll leave it right there for now because this can be an entire video unto itself just because of all the other suspects such as Ashara Dane, as well as some other possibilities. So anyway, that's it for the questions this week, but I want to talk quickly about what George R.R. Martin said, and I'll leave a link in the description to his blog post that's not a blog about the Winds of Winter. So apparently it's not going to be out like we thought before Game of Thrones season 6, but basically he was talking about that, you know, he had these deadlines for the publishers. Apparently it takes about 5 to 6 months to publish a book once he gets his final manuscript over to the publishers. He had a deadline of October 31st, 2015, Halloween. Didn't make it due to various things. And then he thought, okay, he can get it done by the end of the year, which was the next deadline, and it would still be enough time to be published in March. And basically he was like, it's all my fault, yada, 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 but I had all this shit going on. He felt bad about it and said, you know, it's not going to be done. So this, of course, brings all the fears to life that, you know, the show is now going to spoil the books. But I don't think it's really going to spoil anything, at least for me, because here's the way it is anyway. The books are completely different as far as all the extra characters and storylines and subplots, etc. Yes, there will be major things spoiled, I'm sure, as far as, you know, you'll see it on the show first. But for people who only watch the show, this won't matter. And for people who hate the show and only read the books, it won't matter. It's only for us who read and watch the show as well. They've kind of diverged already. They've already done a lot of things differently in the show. And of course, they're circling back around and doing some things that were in the books previously anyway. So that's going to be some of the plots we're going to see in season 6 and 7 for that matter. So for example, they're coming back around in season 6 and doing some of the Ironborn stuff that they left out previously, which was in, you know, back in, I believe, A Feast for Crows mainly. Yeah, I'm disappointed. I wanted to read it before I watched the show. But at the same time, you know, a lot of people got into the books because of the show. So first of all, the show is going to end before A Dream of Spring, the last book, ever gets published in the first place. So that was already going to happen. And also the people were just kind of raising hell about it. You know, George R.R. Martin's his own man, and he writes on his own time and has a lot of shit going on because we made this so popular. So you got to kind of take the attitude that, you know, he's not my personal fucking author. He's not going to write on my timeline and get things out when I want him to. So I kind of understand that. He apparently does a lot of rewriting and stuff, and I can see why with a story this big and complex. You know, this was originally planned to be a trilogy, but ended up growing into something bigger, and now, of course, we're going to have 7 total books as opposed to 3 that were originally planned. We have about 15 or so more Sundays until Game of Thrones season 6. You know, April is coming. And I would guess, based off his blog post, that we will probably be reading Winds of Winter shortly after season 6, probably during the summer sometime. Anyway, that's it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. I got a lot more stuff coming up, including a post Star Wars Episode 7 Q&A. Be on the lookout for that. In the meantime, you can click here for my Blood Raven Part 2 video, which again, I go over Part 1 and 2 of Blood Raven, aka Brendan Rivers. And you can also click here for the video I did on Star Wars Episode 7 and Rey possibly being Luke Skywalker's daughter, as well as Supreme Leader Snoke still being Darth Plagueis. So check those out. Let me know what you think. Thank you guys for all the support. I really appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe to get everything. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.